The United States is moving to uphold free speech all around the world, every country on earth. And this could impact foreign leaders from just about every country on earth. Because look, the State Department announced it will begin restricting the visas of any foreign national involved in censoring or even trying to censor the protected expression of anybody within the United States. Citizen or otherwise, actually, even dissidents here, even people from many countries, even Brazil, I know people. Anyone who a foreign government is trying to censor within the United States, they can lose their visas and may not be able to come here. State Department says this: free speech is among the most cherished rights we enjoy as Americans. This right, legally enshrined in our Constitution, has set us apart as a beacon of freedom around the world. Even as we take action to reject censorship at home, we see troubling instances of foreign governments and foreign officials picking up the slack. In some instances, foreign officials have taken flagrant censorship actions against U.S. tech companies and U.S. citizens and residents when they have no authority to do so. And Rubio said, quote, "Today I'm announcing a new visa restriction policy that will apply to foreign nationals who are responsible for censorship of protected expression in the United States. It is unacceptable for foreign officials to issue or threaten arrest warrants on U.S. citizens or U.S. residents for social media posts on American platforms while physically present on U.S. soil." A few cases on this. The U.K. was even threatening to extradite Americans for posting things about some of the Muslim murders they had there, killing Christians and so on. One case in particular, an individual who was a second-generation immigrant murdered a large number of little girls at a dance academy, stabbing them dozens of times. Horrible, horrible crime. Americans were posting about it. The British police were threatening to extradite Americans to face trial in the UK for that. But of course, they're being accused of, inciting riots because there were large-scale protests. But back to Rubio, he says this. He said, "It is similarly unacceptable for foreign officials to demand that American tech platforms adopt global content moderation policies or engage in censorship activity that reaches beyond their authority and into the United States." A lot of countries do this. Many in Latin America, India, many Asian countries, China, of course, the Chinese Communist Party, and of course, even a lot of Western European countries try to enforce censorship laws on American platforms because they say that allowing free speech, violates their laws. When people say offensive things on the internet, they can fine them, they can target them, they can censor them, they can deplatform them, and they even extend their authority into the United States. That's no more. Rubio said, "We will not tolerate encroachments upon American sovereignty, especially when such encroachments undermine the exercise of our fundamental right to free speech." He says this visa restriction policy is pursuant to Section 212A3C of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which authorizes the Secretary of State to render inadmissible any alien whose entry into the United States would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. And in this case, any of those aliens could be foreign officials, even government officials, anybody. We might not be going after them in terms of fining them, but they can't come to America if this goes through. It adds as well, certain family members may also be covered by these restrictions, meaning maybe if their kid wants to study at Hartford, for example. Now, this could impact a lot of countries. Elon Musk previously exposed on that X, of course, formerly known as Twitter, X gets censorship requests from all over the world. In Brazil, in fact, I know Brazilian influencers living in the United States, again, permanent residents here, who get censored on American soil by Brazilian officials. Even, for example, having their X accounts trying to block them. You might remember that Elon Musk tried stopping that. Elon Musk tried standing up against it during the Biden administration, and he found that the Brazilian courts were putting daily fines on his website, fining him every day that he did not deplatform Brazilian dissidents in the United States. That happens in a lot of countries. It's in Latin America, many parts of Latin America. It's in India. It's in many parts of Europe. Many Asian countries. It's, of course, the Chinese Communist Party, probably the biggest offender of this. And this would be big also for the sons, daughters, and family members, and even the officials themselves under the Chinese Communist Party, because they could all lose their visas to the United States and maybe face additional punishments if it turns out the issue is serious enough. To be clear, this is most countries. Most countries have laws like this. And also, the new announcement is accompanied by something else, something pretty big, actually. There are related efforts going on, and these may work to even to unlock the freedom of speech in other countries, not even just for American citizens, to defend the rights of free speech of people on foreign shores and even in Europe. In fact, it's being reported the Trump administration has sent a team now, a free speech team, to the United Kingdom, and they're investigating how people like pro-life activists, people who oppose abortion, Christians praying in their minds and being punished for it, how the free speech of people in other countries is being undermined. America is bringing back a global standard of what we represent. The constitutional rights, maybe not the Second Amendment, but at the very least, the freedom of speech and freedom of belief. Telegraph said this. It said Donald Trump sent U.S. officials to meet British pro-life activists over concerns their freedom of speech has been threatened, the Telegraph can reveal. It says a 5-person team from the U.S. State Department spent days in the country and interviewed campaigners to feed back to the White House. They met with 5 activists who have been arrested for silently protesting outside abortion clinics across Britain. Silently protesting, in other words, they're standing there not saying a word. Maybe they hold a sign saying, if you'd like to talk to me. There's an old lady arrested like that. British police questioning them, are you praying? And they say no, and they'll say, are you praying in your head? Are you praying in your mind? And if they say yes, well, it's off to jail with you. And note this as well. It says Washington launched the fact-finding mission, this team of free speech officials going to the UK. It says, after becoming concerned about the erosion of free speech in the UK, the visit is the latest sign of the Trump administration's willingness to intervene in domestic British affairs. And it says the diplomats from the U.S. Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, DRL, traveled to London in March in an effort to, quote, affirm the importance of freedom of expression in the UK, and not just the UK, it says across Europe. We are liberating Europe, apparently. Now, note this. Led by Samuel Sampson, a senior advisor in the State Department, they met with officials from the Foreign Office and challenged Ofcom on the Online Safety Act. You got to keep you safe from opinions and offensive language, which it says is thought to be a point of contention in the White House. And notes further, and the delegation also quietly met with a handful of anti-abortion campaigners at an event held at a nondescript office block, the Telegraph can reveal. Now, look, that's going to be a big deal for the UK. Reports from April, they said that police in the United Kingdom were arresting more than 30 people every single day for posts they were making online. It was people being offended by things. They said, you're offending me, you might get a visit by the police. The Times reported that thousands of people were being detained and questioned for saying things online that were said to cause, quote, annoyance, inconvenience, or anxiety. And it noted that around 12,000 people are being arrested in the United Kingdom every single year for charges like this. That's a lot of people. Now, on a related point, the Trump administration is also facing a lawsuit from NPR and kind of going the other way, and also from 3 public radio stations in Colorado. Now, the issue is not technically about them being censored, but it is a First Amendment issue. The issue is that the Trump is looking to pool their government funding. Kind of funny because they said they're not government funded, but they're pulling their government funding now. And these outlets are arguing that pooling their government funding is a violation of the First Amendment because they say it's like punishment for what they're saying, basically. Look, a lot of media do not get government funding, at least not that I know of. And so to say that they're being punished for not getting money from the government, it's a strange argument. But here's what NPR says. They say NPR And 3 Colorado public radio stations filed suit Tuesday morning in federal court against the Trump White House over the president's executive order that purportedly bars the use of congressionally appropriated funds for NPR and PBS. This is the technical issue here. They say basically that it's the role of Congress to handle the budgets and that Trump is overriding his constitutional authority by doing something related to budgets without Congress doing it effectively. Further, it explains this a bit more. It says the lawsuit says the administration is usurping Congress's power to direct how federal money will be spent and to pass laws. It names President Trump, White House Budget Director Russell Vought, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and Maria Rosario Jackson, the chair of the National Endowment for the Arts, as defendants. It says a team that includes noted free speech lawyer Theodore J. Bertros filed the lawsuit for NPR and the Colorado stations jointly in the District of Columbia, good old Washington, D.C. It says the suit calls Trump's early May executive order, which we'll get into, quote, textbook retaliation and an existential threat to the public radio system that millions of Americans across the country rely on for vital news and information. Now, they note PBS is not a party to the lawsuit. The television network issued a statement Tuesday morning saying PBS is considering every option, including taking legal action to allow our organization to continue to provide essential programming and services to all member stations and all Americans. Now, look, the counter-argument here, government funding for media is not guaranteed under the Constitution. In fact, if you want to talk about separation of powers, you know, if a journalist accepts government money, you might question whether they're impartial or not. This is not some constitutional protected right that you're entitled to get money from the government. The news outlets argue, though, again, the reason they're doing this is they say that Trump is essentially pulling their funding because he personally doesn't like their political speech. That's kind of their argument. And when it comes to budgets, they do note it is the authority of Congress to decide where the taxpayer money goes. That's, of course, part of the bigger debate right now in the United States, whether Trump has a lot of the authority he's been using or whether it has to go through Congress, especially on the budget and even with tariffs now, by the way. They're trying to block him on tariffs. Now, another side of this, though, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, it does have standards on broadcast. If you're on radio, if you're on television, there are certain laws with that, and you can lose your broadcast license through the FCC if you violate that. For example, 60 Minutes is facing some issues right now because of allegedly, selectively editing interviews with Kamala Harris during the campaign trail. For example, CBS, Paramount, they're in hot water over that. There's a lot of issues like that. There's also talk about going after the broadcast licenses of a lot of radio stations because, they're being bought up by political activist groups. And there are some questions over whether they could be in violation of FCC laws. Basically, if you're going to be broadcasting on these, again, public systems, monitored, regulated by the FCC, there are certain standards of being politically fair, and especially during elections. A lot of this is about elections. But on the point of the executive order Trump signed, this was the White House order that could effectively pull the government funding from NPR and maybe a lot of other outlets that have been getting government money, apparently. The White House said this May 1st. It says National Public Radio, NPR, and the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, receive taxpayer funds through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, CPB. Unlike in 1967 when the CPB was established, today the media landscape is filled with abundant, diverse, and innovative news options. Government funding of news media in this environment is not only outdated and unnecessary, but corrosive to the appearance of journalistic independence. At the very least, Americans have the right to expect that their tax dollars fund public broadcasting at all. They fund only fair, accurate, unbiased, and nonpartisan news coverage. No media outlet has a constitutional right to taxpayer subsidies, and the government is entitled to determine which categories of activities to subsidize. The CPB's governing statute reflects principles of impartiality. The CPB, it says, may not contribute to or otherwise support any political party. And that is under their direct standards, in fact, which they note here. Meaning, if a news outlet is fully in line with one political party against another, it is in violation of the very contract they have, the laws of the organization. It says here, the CPB fails to abide by these principles to the extent it subsidizes NPR and PBS. Which viewpoints NPR and PBS promote does not matter. What does matter is that neither entity presents a fair, accurate, or unbiased portrayal of current events to taxpaying citizens. And Trump said, I therefore instruct the CPB Board of Directors, which he just refers to as the CPB Board, and all executive departments and agencies to cease federal funding for NPR and PBS. Now, look, again, you could argue this is censorship on the part that maybe Trump is using his personal belief, his personal perception of political bias. I don't think you'd have to look too hard to say that they have an obvious bias. In terms of employees, again, these outlets deny it. They say that they're not biased. But if you look at their employees, management, and so on, it's basically just on one side of the political aisle, mostly Democrats. They do not have a balance of staff between Republican and Democrat. I don't know about independents. But on the other side of it, it could argue this is not really censorship because it's not like NPR or any outlet. It's not like they're being forced to change how they cover the news. It's not like they're being told how to regulate their speech. They're being told they can still say whatever the heck they want. But the issue is they're not entitled to government funding. And the other issue is if you're an entity that receives government funding through a government contract, the government can end a contract. They can divert the funding. They can choose to give it to somebody else. Congress, again, gives the budget, but the budget can be used for different entities. The details of it, in other words, the granular parts of it, are not necessarily regulated. So we will see how well this lawsuit works. And the other issue is, well, if it does turn out that they are in fact entitled to receiving government funding, it raises a big question of whether other news outlets should also receive government funding. Why doesn't everybody get it if it's a constitutional protected right that you get money from the government? And then, what would that mean for the freedom of the press if that were to happen, if everything was just suddenly state-run? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. Now, look, this also ties into a deeper argument of whether government funding comes with strings attached, though. If you take the money, are you really different from a government entity? If the government gives money to a news outlet, can that news outlet say whatever it wants anymore? Can they have bias? Can they be manipulated? That's another big question. What about if a government official decides to give funding to a partisan outlet with the intent of pushing in the interests of their own political opinions? What if they subsidize one outlet and that state-funded news outlet then goes on to write like hit pieces or attack pieces on the rival party? What if they do things to prop up one candidate during an election and tear down the other, which is one of the things they're being accused of, by the way? What happens if they use that government money to keep things running and they use it to destroy their rivals and to use their money to engage in partisan issues that undermine elections or undermine one party in the interests of another? Is that then okay for a maybe partisan individual to delegate funding in that case? This could actually raise a lot of different issues because I think these are legitimate concerns. But on to another topic though, folks. ICE agents, well, they have a new daily goal. ICE is now looking to ramp up arrests to around 3,000 illegal immigrants every single day. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you're getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. ICE agents have a new daily goal. They're now looking to arrest around 3,000 illegal immigrants every single day. Axios notes this. It says in a tense meeting last week, top Trump aide Stephen Miller and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem demanded that immigration agents seek to arrest 3,000 people a day, according to two sources familiar with the meeting. Briefly on this, when I see a news outlet framing the behavior of individuals while citing unnamed sources who were at a meeting, I would wonder whether the interpretation of the behavior or temperament of the individuals has been skewed by the personal feelings and emotions of the sources, especially if they felt strongly enough about it to go and talk to the media. Obviously, the individuals speaking about this probably do not support it. But on that point, aside from it, it does seem they are looking to ramp up operations. And Axios says this. It says the new target is triple the number of daily arrests that agents were making in the early days of Trump's term, and suggests the president's top immigration officials are full steam ahead in pushing for mass deportations. It says the increased pressure on agents comes as border crossing numbers have plummeted in Trump's first 4 months. It says it signals an increasingly aggressive approach to making arrests in non-border communities nationwide. It also comes as the Trump administration's heavy-handed tactics, it says, in rounding up unauthorized immigrants, they mean illegal immigrants, and in some cases it says legal residents, and even U.S. citizens. That's actually kind of not true. That's a media narrative right now. It's based very heavily on false information. The real narrative with it is that if an individual is being arrested, they have a family member, maybe it's a mother, her kid is an American citizen, the mother can request the kid be deported with her. It's not like immigration authorities are deporting U.S. citizens. I've seen reports on this go around and claims going around. It is a false statement. It's an absolute lie. The other side with it, though, is, again, if a child wants to go with his mom when she's being deported, they can go. It is a voluntary issue. The other side of it is you have had some cases where legal residents and U.S. citizens, they are questioned, rounded up, they check their citizenship, then they're okay to let them go. That's the technicality here, but the media has been really deeply misrepresenting this, making it seem that American citizens are just being like rounded up and deported. That's not happening. And again, the media has been very dishonest about that. But they go back to this. They say immigrants appear to have contributed to President Trump's slipping poll numbers on immigration. Again, the lack of large deportations. And so they're framing this as Trump trying to get back in the goodwill of the American people. Again, also a deep misrepresentation of data. It depends on who you're looking at. You have had some Democrat polls come out and some skewed, saying Trump's poll numbers are horrible. Others say that he's at record high numbers. It depends on who you're asking. The numbers are all over the place, and people can cite which one they want, depending on what their own political beliefs are. It's just the media being the media, as far as I'm concerned. But back to the point. 3,000 people a day. If they were to deport 3,000 people every single day for the next 4 years, what is that? Well, basically 3,000 people a day, that would be around 1.095 million people every year. So by Trump's, the end of the fourth term, or the end of the 4 year, I don't know about fourth term, end of the fourth year, maybe Trump will have deported 4 million people. That's a pretty high number. Keep in mind that under the Obama administration, when they used to call Obama the deporter-in-chief, they were carrying out quite a lot of deportations. At the peak of the Obama administration, they were typically deporting about 400,000 people a year. So Trump's goal with this, ICE's goal, over double that. That's pretty high. But at the same time, if the low estimates of around 20 million illegal immigrants in the country are accurate, They say that under Biden alone, about 10 million people illegally entered the country. This would go a long way from resolving that. It could be argued the push for self-deportations, the additional pressure from fines and criminal charges, maybe those will change things. But the numbers, 3,000 a day, would not even get out the people who illegally entered just under the Biden administration, unless they do something else, which they might, by the way. But on that point, back to what's happening with ICE, they do seem to be ramping up their efforts. And as part of the operations, they're also now turning to the public for tips. If they want to arrest 3,000 people a day, they need help. And the White House seems to be on this. They posted a video showing ICE agents arresting a group of illegal immigrants, which it says were outside a, quote, home improvement store. I'm sure many of you have driven by home improvement stores like Home Depot or Lowe's and seen people staying outside, of course, wanting people to pick them up and help them build something, right? They do it for work often. Someone called ICE on them. ICE recorded it. The White House reposted the recording of them being arrested. And the Post also promotes what seems to be the new focus of the administration. There is a hotline where anybody can call, and a website also. You can call and report illegal immigrants to Immigration Customs Enforcement, or ICE. So if you see a restaurant and they're hiring illegal immigrants, or a construction site and they're hiring illegal immigrants, or people standing outside of a home improvement store, you can call ICE. And the White House posted this. It said, one ICE tip, 5 aliens down. Posting the video again of 5 illegal immigrants, at least allegedly, being arrested outside a home improvement store. They say, got a tip, call ICE now, 866-DHS-2-ICE. They repeat it. Now look, the ICE account also has the same video, and they went a bit more into the hotline. The official ICE account says, when you call our tip line, we listen. A tip from the public led to the arrest of 5 illegal aliens near a big box home improvement store in Baltimore, May 20th. Watch the action-packed arrest video where they ambush these. They could drive up, they kind of like wait by the doors, they rush out, they tackle the guys, arrest them. And they say this, report suspicious criminal activity. They give the phone number again, and they also, again, have a website for it. Now, on that point, you might have some people falsely accused with this. So maybe there is some truth to it, because what's going to happen, you can suspect somebody is an illegal immigrant. It's not like the American citizen's going to go up to these people and, ask for their passports and confirm they're not illegal. They're not like, U.S. permanent residents or something. This makes it so that people can call and report suspected illegal immigrants. Even when they have not been able to fully confirm it, you can do it anonymously, which used to not really be the case. And also, you can do it when they have not yet committed a crime. In the past, they actually did have ICE tip lines, but you, as a citizen, you were kind of liable to it. There were some risks if you wanted to report somebody. If you reported somebody, it turned out they were not an illegal immigrant, and you were just being biased, you might have been punished. You might have actually faced punishment for that. Maybe making a false police report. It seems they've changed that. You can call purely on a suspicion now. You can give anonymous tips. That used to not be the case. So they have really changed it. And on that point also, ICE stated in another post that, quote, to help law enforcement nationwide arrest and remove criminal aliens, ICE's Law Enforcement Support Center provides timely immigration and identity info, real-time assistance when encountering illegal aliens. Suggesting, of course, that maybe they are taking steps to confirm before they jump out of a vehicle and tackle them, that the individuals are in fact illegal immigrants. And then it gives the website and phone number again, of course. It does seem to be, this is going to be a big focus. If they do want to meet that goal, this suggests that they're asking the public for help. And they're going to be going big on it. Now, on another point, though, something coming out of Mexico right now, really grim news, actually. I mentioned there were reports of mass graves being found in Mexico. I also noted there were reports of a cartel extermination site that was found. that there was some place where they were like mass executing people in Mexico. That finding, confirmed now, shocking, it is sparking protests in Mexico. In fact, in Mexico, they're calling the recently discovered site the Mexican Auschwitz. LA Times says this: it has become a kind of rallying cry. Tecuitlan, the township in the western state of Jalisco, where searchers made a macabre discovery, a ranch of horrors featuring makeshift crematoria and hundreds of abandoned shoes, backpacks, T-shirts, and other personal effects. Again, that's why they're calling it the Mexican Auschwitz. You have a crematorium, and just like they found like the Nazi death camps, you have people's shoes and just piles of them. And notes that news reports proclaimed it the Mexican Auschwitz, in an apparent cartel killing ground. It says now this place blares from protest banners. This is being, again, kind of the rallying call among Mexicans going against the cartels and even calling out their own government and their local officials for corruption, for working with the cartels, or for covering up for the cartels. It notes that this is on headlines, banners, street graffiti, and they say the name of this place is shorthand for a pervasive sense of deception and unease. It says this also: police have arrested an alleged cartel recruiter named as the ringleader of the site, and also jailed the mayor of Tecuitlan. Even so, it says, activists for the missing accuse the government of President Claudia Sheinbaum, again the leader of Mexico, who vowed to uncover the truth of a cover-up. They're saying that she's covering it up. That's the accusation, at least. And one of the individuals says, quote, "We all feel betrayed," said Raul Servin, one of the first searchers at the scene. It says authorities now insist the ranch was never a place of extermination or the large-scale disposal of bodies, but rather served as a cartel training ground. Nothing to see here. It's just a cartel training ground with a crematorium and piles of shoes and backpacks and shirts and other things from individuals who suddenly have disappeared. It says apparently one of many such clandestine sites scattered across Mexico. So they're basically saying it's not Auschwitz in Mexico. There's tons of these places all across Mexico. Nothing to see here. And they note it provides recruits for an industry that is among the nation's most prolific employers. One of the biggest employers in Mexico, the drug cartels. This is just where they train them. Nothing to see here, they're saying. On that point also, they've had other pretty horrific discoveries, I've worked with Oscar Ramirez. He's with One America's Voice. Again, one of their foreign correspondents. He's been down there. He's been posting a lot of videos. He's been posting about mass graves. Those are confirmed, mass graves. They had another case. They called the guy the soup maker, who was in charge of disposing of the bodies of people the cartels were murdering. They call him the soup maker because he was dissolving the bodies of people in vats of acid. So yeah, that is confirmed. But they're saying nothing to see here. There's all these places all over Mexico. Nothing to see here. Just normal cartel training grounds for one of the largest employers in Mexico, unfortunately. Really shocking stuff. But the important thing here is that Mexican citizens, they are outraged by it. They're protesting against it. And for them to do that, that's very dangerous because the cartels go after them. Big shifts taking place in Mexico. And the cartels also now designated as terrorists by the United States. And of course, being blocked from carrying out operations in Mexico because the government of Mexico is blocking America from doing that. On another note, though, there's an update on Trump's current kind of back and forth with Harvard University. Trump is taking steps to remove Harvard's ability to enroll foreign students. And that effort currently on hold because, well, a federal judge blocked it, as tends to happen in almost every order he has. But Trump is now laying out a new vision that there could be a set cap on the number of foreign students at the university, Harvard. Now, Newsmax says this. It says President Donald Trump said on Wednesday that Harvard University should have a 15% cap on the number of foreign students it admits, and that the Ivy League school needs to show the administration their current list of students from other countries. Harvard has been refusing to do that, by the way. Now they say this, quote, Harvard has got to behave themselves, Trump says. He says Harvard is threatening our country with great disrespect, and all they're doing is getting in deeper and deeper, Trump told reporters gathered at the Oval Office. And during a swearing-in ceremony at the White House yesterday, Trump talked about this. Trump took questions from the press and discussed some of his concerns with Harvard. Watch.
How will the confrontation with Harvard end? You will see.
I don't know. I don't know. Harvard's got to behave themselves. Harvard is treating our country with great disrespect, and all they're doing is getting in deeper and deeper and deeper. They've got to behave themselves. You know, I'm looking out for the country and for Harvard. I want Harvard to do well. I want Harvard to be great again, probably, because how could it be great? How could it be great when you have Harvard announced 2 weeks ago that they are going to teach remedial mathematics, remedial, meaning they're going to teach low-grade mathematics, like 2 + 2 is 4. How did these people get into Harvard if they can't do basic mathematics?
Imagine that. Harvard University has a remedial math class. Interesting. On that point also, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he has announced a new measure. They're now revoking the student visas of all Chinese citizens. All Chinese citizens are now losing their student visas in the United States. Massive move on this. And they're also removing the visas for, Chinese individuals, Chinese citizens, in American-funded research projects. The concern being raised here is that many of these people are being forced to work as spies for the Chinese Communist Party. Huge issue in the United States. That said, not all Chinese students are spies, but America seems to view this as a serious enough issue where they're just not willing to take the risk anymore. That is now happening, just announced. All right, folks, that said, questions, comments, leave them in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. Real quick, by the way, I'm going to be in Irvine, California, coming up pretty soon. I'm going to be having an event, so if you want to come to the event, join me there. Let me give you the info. The event will be Thursday, June 5th, so next week, if you want to come hang out next week. Thursday, June 5th. That's going to be in Irvine, Orange County, California. The topic I'm going to be speaking on is the U.S.-China trade war. I'll be going into some of the details of that. You can click the link in the live chat or in the description below, RSVP for the event. Come join us. It's not a huge area, so you can hang out. If you want to come, click the link. So I'll be there next week. And I'll still be doing the show, by the way. I'll just be doing it probably from a hotel or something. So come join us, folks. First question here. Seymour Butts, you're saying, do you think we are better off now knowing the waste, fraud, and abuse exists but not correcting it? Or would we be better off just not knowing? I've thought about that too. There's, let me give you my take on it, okay? We've been told now, whether it's the Doge department, whether it's Trump, whether it's just good old-fashioned investigative reporting, we've come to know that there are a lot of problems, right? We know there is very large-scale waste. The waste within the Medicaid system, the fraud taking place, foreign fraud, defrauding Americans, stealing Social Security numbers, people getting like Medicaid and Medicare who are not even American citizens, scammers in other countries stealing it. And it turns out like half of the phone calls that they're getting through the Social Security Department are fraudsters trying to steal our money. In addition to, just all the waste we've seen, crazy stuff our money's being spent on, that Americans seem to have been subsidizing just crazy stuff like in most countries around the world. I think a lot of people are shocked by it. Elon Musk is talking about this. Elon Musk seemed very unhappy that even Republicans were not enshrining some of his, Doge cuts within the reconciliation budget. I should note the Republican argument for that. They note that the reconciliation budget cannot have that. The reconciliation budget, the one they're trying to push through, the one big beautiful bill, there are some barriers to what defines a reconciliation budget. And with that, it's a special kind because it doesn't have the filibuster. All Republicans need is a simple majority to pass that, but there's some things they cannot include in it. And so that's the counter argument to that. But back to the main point here, right? Are we better off knowing of problems if the problems do not get fixed? I've thought about this a lot. The simple answer I would say is yes, we are better off, because even if it doesn't get fixed initially, government action is spurred onward by public discourse. In other words, if the public cares enough about an issue and really cares enough about it, they will vote for people to represent them in the government who will then at least take actions to resolve those issues. If voters care enough about this and continue caring enough about it, then they will vote for people who will, again, go after it. If they don't care enough about it, then no, they won't. And I think what you're watching right now, you're watching the Trump administration go in and effectively trying to just massively clean house. And you could argue that on one side, maybe you say it's a fantastic thing, maybe you agree with it, and on the other side, you might say it's like a bull in a china shop. Maybe they're knocking over some things that should be knocked over, and maybe they're knocking over a lot of things that should not be knocked over. You be the judge on that. That's been the argument also from the Democrat side. They're like, okay, we admit, there was fraud and abuse, but you're going after a lot of other things that don't fall within that category. Even some NGOs that were probably doing some good work just are losing their entire budgets. It's it's kind of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That's one argument with it. I think the argument from the Trump side is if an individual was misusing things, if the problem is so big, you need to kind of throw the whole thing out and then start it over again. It's broken. Try turning it off and turning it back on. You know what I mean? And so it seems what they're doing is they seem to regard the issue as so serious, they need to entirely just get rid of most of it, and then case by case establish new standards of review, establish new standards of looking at things, and make sure the problems that existed before do not exist going forward. One example of this is the student visas. Yes, they're revoking the visas of foreign students. They're doing that right now. They're freezing a lot of them, but they're also saying they're starting a new process to more thoroughly review the social media activity and maybe look into the individuals to make sure we're not bringing in terrorists and spies. So they may get rid of a lot of, they might deport a lot of people or revoke their visas, but that's going to be accompanied with the process of actually looking into whether the people are good or not and whether they should be here or not. In other words, they're not ending it forever. It's just kind of like a reset of the system. One case with this. The other side is, and I reflected on this a bit, because look, I think it's I don't try to hide. I try to be impartial. I try to show you all both sides of arguments. I try to put myself in other people's shoes. I make a real effort with this, but I have my opinions too. And so I can tell you, look, I get bothered when I see corruption, obviously, right? Because I care about this stuff. I would like to see my country healthy. I'd like to see my country working well. I care about these things. At the same time, to expect a government to be completely free of corruption, that has never existed. And this is me being a bit of a realist. In all of human history, you have never had that. The idea, I think we should aspire towards that. We should definitely aspire towards it. A government free of corruption would be a fantastic thing. I've been thinking about this, looking back at every government in all of human history. Have we ever had a government in any civilization, in any empire, in any part of the entire breadth of human civilization that has not had some kind of issue? I don't think we have. I don't know, maybe Moses. I think Moses might have been free of corruption. King Solomon, he was he had some issues. You know, he had some issues. King David, there was that whole weird thing with Bathsheba, right? You know, I don't know if you've had it. You've had very good governments, but you're always going to have some problems. You can have the best leader in the world. That leader's not going to be perfect. You know, and even for people like Trump. Trump is definitely a flawed person. He kind of owns his flaws. You know what I mean? He's had issues with his wives, for example. You know, but I don't think you've ever had a leader who has not had some issues. And so, on one side, I believe we should aspire. I believe recognizing a problem and acknowledging a problem exists makes us have at least a desire to correct the problem. And I think that's healthy. I think that the informing of the public will make it, if they do care about an issue, they should want to fix it. And so wanting to fix an issue begins a process. The reality is you're not going to see it fixed overnight, and you'll probably never watch it get fully fixed because that's just human nature. You're never going to have people who are perfect. Never. No, I'm not perfect. I doubt any, and I bet if somebody says they're perfect, they're probably hiding something really creepy from you. Everybody has flaws. And so for a person to pretend they don't, like, it's just not real. And there's no such thing as a government's not going to have some problems. That's just human nature. Now, should we expect that? Well, that's why we have laws, right? That's why we have laws. Laws are in place to correct things that a person's own internal moral standards would make them not do in the first place, right? There's an internal stability and an external stability in life, right? Personal restraint, in my opinion, represents the most solid form of integrity. That you're deciding to not do something, even if you have the opportunity for it, because it goes against your moral beliefs. You think it's not good, you don't have a desire for it, you don't do it, even if nobody's watching you. That is the most stable form of order. The extent to which that fails is where law comes in. And external law, not internal law, represents, of course, government. It represents the court system, represents the legal systems. And external law will try to correct things when a person's own personal restraint is not strong enough to prevent problems from taking place. And so, again, just laying this out, in my opinion, recognizing that a problem exists creates a desire to fix it. And I think the opposite of that, just throwing our hands up saying, it's too big of an issue, who cares, that's when you have problems. When you decide there's a problem and you don't want to fix it, that's when you institutionalize a problem. And I think that's when your society is going to fail. So in my opinion, it's a good thing. It is a good thing. But also manage expectations. This is maybe the stoic in me. Manage expectations. There's no such thing as a flawless government or a flawless person. You can't view a government official as being any different from, like, you know, your next door neighbor, right? Everybody's human, and human nature is flawed, right? That's just how it is. And so I would hope we as a nation aspire towards goodness. But I hope also that we don't lose hope when we see that not everything's perfect, right? That's how I view it. And also don't try to tear the whole thing down just because people have flaws. That's my personal opinion. Flame-broiled squirrel. Interesting name. Flame-broiled squirrel. You're saying using bureaucracy, which I hear squirrel tastes good. I've never had it. I hear squirrel tastes good. You're saying using bureaucracy to fight bureaucracy is doomed to failure. You're saying that's what makes the American experiment unique among governments. It's the only one that was designed from the ground up, acknowledging the inevitability of corruption seeping in. You know, that's a great point, actually. And that's also why there's a lot of checks and balances in the American system. Look, I know a lot of Republicans are like, the court system blocking Trump again. Trump needs to do everything he can before Congress votes a bunch of Democrats in and they block him. Like, That's how the Founding Fathers set up our government. They set our government up in such a way where it's hard to do anything. That is the truth, right? If you want to blame anybody for this, blame the Founding Fathers, I guess. But I can guarantee if the shoe were on the other foot, you'd all support it. Really, right? If Kamala Harris was president and she was doing the same thing Trump was, but for the other side, I guarantee Republicans would be the ones trying to get the judges to block it too. But that's how our system is set up. 3 branches of government, checks and balances, and even to the extent that at the state level, there are state rights, that the states can go against the federal government to an extent. They used to be able to do it a lot more before the Civil War, which led to other problems, I should note, like slavery. And I'm glad we don't have that, at least. But even at the policing level, a sheriff, an elected official, of course, can choose to not enforce what they believe are unconstitutional laws. Every individual government official, every individual sheriff deputy, I believe most police officers, every single member of the U.S. Armed Services, what do? They swear an oath to protect the Constitution, to defend the Constitution from enemies both foreign and domestic. And so even on the individual level, we have standards in place where if somebody believes something is unconstitutional, they're not supposed to follow it. And that's it's a really interesting standard that we have in America where, let's say, peaceful non-cooperation or civil disobedience to an extent is actually built into the oath of office, right? Built into the oath sworn by troops within our armed services. That's a unique thing. Loyalty to the Constitution, but not loyalty to a specific individual, especially if they believe the individual is overriding their constitutional authority. That is something built into our system. In the oaths that are sworn, and the standards we have in our laws, and the ability of, lawsuits to be filed, and the nature of the Supreme Court to make constitutional determinations, and even in the rights of individuals to say that they disagree with that and choose to not do it. Sometimes to their own detriment, of course, right? But that is the way our system's set up. And so, even if I disagree with certain individuals, I can understand where they're coming from. Even if I disagree with a person's belief that maybe something is unconstitutional, I think it is constitutional, I respect their opinions. Again, I'm not saying I agree with it, but I am saying I understand it, and I am glad that the authority to do so exists, because that protects me if I'm ever on the other side of it. You know what I mean? And so that's basically how I view it. America is a very unique system, and as flame-broiled squirrel notes, that is also kind of where the Founding Fathers were coming from. The Founding Fathers, their starting point was a distrust of government, which is a weird place for your government to be, right? Your government was founded on the principles of distrust of government, which is why, again, there's checks and balances and systems in place to prevent dictatorship, right? Or corruption, for that matter. But also created in such a way that acknowledges that corruption and human flaws are inevitable, and so there are systems in place to prevent that from damaging the overall system. It's an incredible system they put in place, actually. It really is, actually. And remember, our country was founded by outlaw insurrectionists, by the way, right? People who launched an insurrection against the British government. So that's our Founding Fathers, folks. Martin McKenzie, you said, question here. Strings attached to government money is the real issue. NPR is radically left due to government money. Not to split government money. Not in spite of government money. Good point, Josh. Yeah. And again, if we look back to the Biden administration, that was a lot of the accusation, right? Remember, there were a lot of things taking place that were regarded as kind of hand-in-glove operations. If you're a government entity, there are certain things you cannot do. If you're a government entity, you cannot get involved in censorship. There are certain standards in place that legally prevent you from engaging in like political activities. In fact, even a nonprofit, a 501c3, there are standards in place where you can't like endorse one political party over another. Epic Times, we are a 501c3, which is why I don't endorse any politicians, by the way. If you're curious, I'm registered as non-politically affiliated. I'm not Republican or Democrat in terms of registration. I like to think for myself. What can I say? But there are laws under government entities and even nonprofit status that have requirements like this. And so, one of the concerns was, well, what happens then if a government agency or maybe an individual who is in charge of delegating budgets decides to give money to an entity that can do things that they want to do but cannot legally do? And maybe they work with them, provide funding for them to carry out those operations, and they do it in a partisan or special interest manner. A lot of the censorship establishment worked like that, where, again, taxpayer money and even some government programs were public-private programs. They were working in conjunction with private entities, news outlets, fact-checkers, NGOs, and those things were almost entirely on one side of the political aisle and were using the authority and money they were given to only go after the other side of the political aisle for the most part. Was that legal? Was that censorship? Was that government censorship, given the fact that it was a public-private partnership and they were receiving government money in doing that? Well, I don't know. I think the court still needs to determine that. But I could say, because, look, I was on the victim end of that whole deal. You know what I mean? Where they, again, they were like labeling Epic Times, for example, some of these entities. We were negatively impacted by that. So obviously I don't agree with it, but you could call me a biased party because I was impacted by it, right? But on that front, it did raise a deeper question of kind of whether government money has strings attached and whether government money maybe can be used in a way that could bypass certain barriers that the government would have to follow otherwise. In other words, the Constitution. Can they violate the Constitution by using side door practices? Right? That was the big issue with the censorship stuff. And so the same thing with giving government money to news outlets that are politically one-sided. Does that also violate that? If a government entity can't do that, can a private business do it if they get government money? It's a good question, right? And then it raises the bigger question of, well, doesn't everybody have an opinion, right? And so maybe they should just do it in a balanced way. Maybe they should, if they give money to a Democrat-aligned entity, maybe they should give money to a Republican-aligned entity to kind of balance the scales. I don't know. Again, these are issues that are not entirely resolved currently within the legal system. And I do think maybe the NPR lawsuit will bring that up to the Supreme Court. Maybe they'll make a determination on it. But these are questions that are not really fixed right now. We don't have a clear answer on the legal boundaries of this, because a lot of this is relatively new. A lot of these problems are relatively new. Another question here, J.P. Richard is saying, Josh, why is it that the New York Times has published so many negative articles about the Falun Gong and Shen Yun performances? Yeah, right. So New York Times has been running ongoing hit pieces, like within the span of like a few months, I believe like 10 hit pieces against Shen Yun Performing Arts. Why are they doing it? I can say, so what is Falun Gong? Falun Gong is a Chinese meditation practice. You could call it a religion, although it's different from like Western religion, in that it's more about character refinement, right? If you want to simplify it, it's people trying to be good people and they're being persecuted for it. On the simplest level, you could call it like that. It's kind of like Tai Chi. If you know the history of Tai Chi in China, very similar to that, but with a moral component. The moral component being truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, being an honest person, being a kind person, and trying to not be moved by hardship, and focusing on that when you run into conflicts or hardships, trying to look at yourself and saying, what did I do wrong in this circumstance? How can I improve myself? They're being murdered by the Chinese Communist Party for doing that, because the CCP regards them as a threat to their power because there's too many of them, 100 million people in China. So the CCP has been persecuting effectively a group of just good people out of whether it's jealousy or a fear of a large number of people believing in something other than the Communist Party. Now, they've extended that into operations outside of China, because what's happening? Well, entities, Epoch Times, of course, was founded by Chinese dissidents, many of them who practice Falun Gong. They regard us as a threat to the Chinese Communist Party, and so they go after us. One of the reasons why you'll see us getting cyber attacks and CCP-tied entities seeming interested in censoring us. I won't name names, but there's quite a few big tech companies that have done that. And also suspicious activities of major news outlets having secret meetings in China and backroom dealings with China and getting a lot of money from China, which right after that begin attacking Falun Gong and attacking any businesses tied to Falun Gong. Shenyang Performing Arts, of course, also, they expose the persecution of Falun Gong, and they present the culture of China before communism. It's their tagline, in fact, China before communism. The CCP regards them as a threat to their power because they're showing the culture the CCP destroyed or tried to destroy. So how does the New York Times fit in with this? I'll give you a few examples. There was a great report, I believe it's from a human rights organization called the Falun Dafa Information Center. It's a human rights organization investigating the persecution in China and outside China. They documented the entire history of New York Times and its leadership having meetings with CCP leaders, right? All their different meetings, and noted suddenly after the top executives at the New York Times were having all these meetings with Chinese officials, right after that, they seem to have started either censoring, stopping their coverage of, or even going after Falun Gong in the United States. That they were receiving paid inserts from Chinese state media. Isn't that strange? There was an organ harvesting tribunal in the UK where they investigated the organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners for profit as part of the CCP's persecution, where they take people, cut their organs out and sell their organs for profit. The CCP doing that. That tribunal, by the way, did in fact determine that yes, it is happening. It's happening on a large scale. And they even said that even entities that give money to China could be held liable in the future. You could have in the future a type of Nuremberg trial of officials, investors, and otherwise who have worked with the Chinese Communist Party and allowed this to happen. And one thing that came up during that tribunal, there was a journalist there, I believe she was a former New York Times journalist. There was a journalist who came out and said that New York Times killed a story on it. That there was a journalist at the New York Times who wanted to report on the live organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners, and New York Times stopped it from happening. They would not let it be covered. On the other side, in my personal opinion with the New York Times, I'd say this. I believe that this is my personal opinion and my personal belief. I personally believe New York Times has a pro-communist bias. I would actually argue that they advocate very openly for communist movements. And I personally believe one reason why they go after Falun Gong and they go after Shenyang is because, for the most part, Falun Gong is being persecuted by a communist party that they seem to have interest in, the New York Times. And Shenyang, of course, exposes persecutions in China and exposes communism. Same thing with Epoch Times. If we have any bias, we are anti-communist. I think that's a fair thing to say. I'd say if we have any bias, we are anti-communist. But I'd say that's a good bias to have, frankly. And again, a concept that has led to the mass genocides in most of the world at this point, actually. Again, different numbers, estimates. Black Book of Communism would say that, again, a Harvard book, by the way. Black Book of Communism would say communism has led to the deaths of around 100 million people. Current estimates put it significantly higher. 100 million people that you could relatively document, though, murdered by communism. I'd say having an anti-communist stance is a good stance to have, frankly. I'll give you one count of this also. The Epoch Times, several years ago, I think it was 2016 or 2017, we started a series of articles exposing the bloody history of communism. We exposed all the different movements they had, the genocides, cannibalism, horrifying stuff. We talked about all the social movements they had, the human impact, the detriment to humanity, genocide after genocide after genocide. Why is it that we can all agree we can condemn the Nazis for the Holocaust, but why is it that we can't all agree we can condemn the communists for mass murder campaigns that killed a lot more people, actually? I'm not saying one undermines the other. I think we can acknowledge it's all bad. Why can we not do that? So Epoch Times, we exposed this whole thing. We have several books on it. The 9 commentaries in the Communist Party, we published that. We published also The Specter of Communism is Ruling Our World, a book about different communist movements and how it's impacted the culture. When we started that, the New York Times suddenly started doing the opposite. They did an article series promoting communism, right? What a weird timing for them to do it. As soon as Epoch Times starts a series exposing communism and documenting the crimes of communism, New York Times started a series in the same way as us, but on the other side, defending communism. They had articles, I believe it was called, I believe their series is called Red Century. Red Century. They even had like op-eds where they were like saying, "Happy birthday, Karl Marx," and people saying that we will realize your vision, right? Articles defending genocides, covering up genocides, articles promoting communist movements. That was New York Times. So I would say New York Times has a very obvious pro-communist bias, and I believe that's why they go after us, frankly. On the point of Shen Yun also, New York Times has demonstrated a bias against them from the very, very beginning. In fact, because I've been a reporter for a long time, when Shen Yun first started, I can't remember the year. It was probably 2006, 2007. Don't hold me to that. When Shen Yun first started, New York Times sent one of their journalists, and they wrote a hit piece on Shen Yun. And what they did was this. They had their reporter stand by the exit of the theater, and they cherry-picked only the interviews of people who were leaving. Is that valid journalism? If you're only going to interview people by putting yourself in a position where you will cherry-pick only negative opinions, is that valid journalism? That's what New York Times did. And so I think from the very beginning, they have demonstrated a clear bias for the Chinese, in favor of the Chinese Communist Party, in favor of communism, and in opposition to the victims of communism and the victims of the human rights abuses under the Chinese Communist Party. I think what they've done is horrible, absolutely terrible. And they continue to do it, by the way. I do believe that there probably should be some investigations on whether there are ties with them to the Chinese Communist Party and to what extent their ties to the CCP financially or personal have impacted their coverage. I really do think that needs to be looked into. And so I'd say that's what's happening. On that point, by the way, despite the, 10 hit pieces, I don't even know what they're up to now, they just keep doing them. The hit pieces New York Times is writing about Shen Yun, they sold out all their performances. They were in New York. They had to add an additional show. So it's not making people not see it, interestingly. Great show, by the way, if you haven't seen it, but it's a very good show. They sold out all the tickets, from what I understand. They actually had, again, add another performance because they sold out all the shows. Incredible stuff. Another question here, Denise B., you're saying, as for Congress not doing anything about the Doge findings, I wonder if part of it is that they are planning to just not renew the financing of many of those illegitimate programs when they expire at the end of the year or whenever. Yeah, so two sides of that. So there were a lot of news articles going around saying Elon Musk was unhappy with Republicans for not including the Doge cuts in the reconciliation bill. Republicans came out and clarified they could not include that in a reconciliation bill because it's a special kind of bill where, again, with a simple majority, they can pass it. They don't. If all Republicans, have a kumbaya moment and they join hands, and they all vote together, it'll get passed. They don't need any Democrat votes for it. So it's a unique type of bill. Were they to include the DOGE cuts in it, they wouldn't be able to have it as that type of bill. It would be a different bill. So from their side, they're saying that. Another point with that, I actually watched the interview with Elon Musk where a lot of news outlets framed his comments in that way. There's a part where he's asked about whether he's going to continue, again, donating to Republican causes. And, Elon Musk, he looks like in my opinion, he does look like he's somewhat bothered, but he doesn't say that he's going against Republicans. He just says that he doesn't think it's necessary at this time or needed at this time. And so I do think a lot of news outlets did not properly frame his quote. At the same time, though, there are additional stories coming out suggesting that Elon Musk is unhappy that not enough is being done to enshrine the actions of DOGE. On that part, what is DOGE? The DOGE department, the Department of Government Efficiency, is not able to change the budgets. They're an advisory group. And so what they do is they go to different government agencies, they work with the person in charge of that agency, they identify overspending, corruption, other things, they identify them to the head of the agency, and then it is on the head of the agency to cut things, get rid of things, change things, and so on. The other side is under current constitutional law, and this is being debated because I'll explain. Under the Constitution, if you get a budget right now, you have to spend it. Trump is trying to work on changing that where the president can override that. The issue we have, Congress delegates the budget to agencies and so on. Technically, you could say the agencies could redirect funding, but they can't. They have to spend what they have. You could argue that results in unnecessary spending. That results in them spending money they may not have to spend. And so if they have like $100 million, maybe not that, but let's say they have like $1 million sitting around at the end of the season, they have to spend it on something. And so they're like, all right, who wants $1 million birthday party? Maybe not that, but they might be inclined to overspend because the law would require them to do that. Trump right now is trying to overturn that, and he's trying to make it so that any leftover money is put back into the U.S. Treasury. There's a big legal battle right now on that, and that is currently being debated on whether or not he could do that. Trump is arguing that if you go back in history, that's the system in place that requires full spending and not for leftover money to be put into the Treasury. Technically, it's a newer interpretation of the law. And Trump is arguing the president should still have that authority to kind of override that. Again, it's a current debate. So on that point, when it comes to government spending, there are a few things that can be done. So Congress does delegate the budgets. As many people have noted, Congress currently is not cutting the budgets. They're actually spending a lot more. And so even with Republicans in the Senate saying they may block the reconciliation bill, they're doing it. The main reason they're doing it is because it's a lot of money. And they're arguing that we should go back to pre-pandemic spending levels. They're saying that we've been overspending and we can't keep spending it. On the Trump side, they're saying they actually need more money to kind of fix everything. They need the budget to carry out their activities, and they believe that once the money is spent and once we have all the fixes in place, then they can start cutting, but we need to rebuild the country is kind of what they're saying. Bring back manufacturing, subsidize different things, fix a lot of things, and then we can start cutting the budget. But until then, they think they need more money. You gotta spend your way out of this one, in other words, and there's different opinions on whether that's the right way to do it. Back to the point of DOGE, identifying wasteful, unnecessary spending or corruption or whatever else, or fraud. What is happening is this. The money is still there, but the agencies themselves are reallocating it to different programs. So with USAID, for example, right, USAID, whatever you want to call it, now placed under the State Department, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, now in charge of that. One of the many hats he's wearing is the head of multiple agencies. He's been saying that he wants to. They're not getting rid of the spending. They're not getting rid of the programs. He says that he wants to make sure going forward that U.S. aid money or foreign aid, and I know it's not technically aid, it's like development money. He wants the money to only be spent on things that advance the interests of the United States. And they're saying that if it is not in the interest of the United States, they're not going to spend it. Again, the interest of the United States is going to change a lot depending on who's in office. You could argue under the Biden administration, what was the interest of the United States? Well, their foreign interests were a lot around gender policies and race policies. Gender, race, and environment, right? Those were kind of the three main pillars of what they stood for. And so, obviously, a lot of the foreign spending and USAID and development programs were around race politics, gender politics, and environmental politics, right? The Trump administration, they have new agendas. Freedom of speech, not discriminating against people on race or gender, those types of things. Defending the rights of individuals to have their own religious beliefs, right? Defending, in other words, a more constitutional interpretation of what America stands for. And so they're not getting rid of the budgets, they're reallocating the budgets. And that's basically what's happening, right? And that's also why they're not cutting the spending, right? That they're not cutting the spending. They're using the money for things that they believe will help change not only America, but maybe even the entire world. Setting forth a new American agenda and a new identity of what we stand for. Last question. You say, oh, sorry, from you again. You're saying also Elon Musk's tenure at Doge is over. He is leaving. That's right. Elon Musk had a 130-day place in the government. Basically, Elon Musk is a special government employee. I've seen the way a lot of the media has been framing this. They're like, chaos in the White House. Chaos in the White House. Everybody's mad at Musk, and Musk is mad at everybody, and so on. They keep saying that's just fake news. Like, just because even if there's an argument, it doesn't mean you hate each other. Every married couple knows this. But same thing with businesses, and same thing in an environment where you're told to speak your mind. I'd say if you're free from conflict, you're probably not having open conversations, right? If you're having open conversations and speaking your mind, you're probably going to have some arguments. The reality of the situation, I would assume there probably are some disagreements. I do think the media framing of that is at least not fully accurate, and maybe it's partially accurate. I'm sure, I'd imagine there are some disagreements. But the framing that Elon Musk is being pushed out or quitting, that's fake, totally fake. His employment with the U.S. government, he's under a special employee status, and you can only have that for 130 days. And so that will expire. Geez, what's the date today? Today's May 29th. I think it'll expire tomorrow. I believe it's the 30th it expires on. So Elon Musk is going back to building rockets and fighting for free speech on X and so on, and maybe repopulating the planet. Knowing him, we will see, right? He's back to his old stuff. So you're probably not going to be hearing the end of Musk by any means. You know, he's going to be involved with SpaceX and the Boring Company and Tesla and X, and we'll see if he continues to get involved in politics by any means. But in terms of the interests of his companies, especially in foreign countries like Europe and Canada and stuff, maybe not so foreign. I think he is being pressured to kind of become a little less political because it is impacting his companies quite a bit, I'd imagine. Anyways, folks, that said, what day is today? Today is Thursday. Jeez, this week went by fast. I will not have an episode tomorrow. As I mentioned, I'm going to start using my Fridays to do features. I'm in the process. I finished writing I finished research last week. I need to write tomorrow. And I have a good feature on the way for you all. As I mentioned, I'm going to be doing investigations and features again. My plan is I want to actually publish these under a different channel. If you're on Epic TV, it won't change anything. If you're on YouTube, we'll probably have a different channel for it. I'll keep you updated on that. But I want to start doing in-depth content again. I like doing the daily stuff. Don't worry, I'm not going to stop doing it. But I want to also do bigger stories and deeper stories and investigations. Again, I'm also the senior investigative reporter at Epic Times, right? So I want to start doing that again. And so I'm going to use my Fridays for that. So I'm not going to have a normal Crossroads episode on Friday while I'm doing that. Very soon, you will start getting a new episode, which will be the in-depth features and investigations. And if you would all like to still join us on Friday, join us at Primetime. Primetime is the show I do with NTD. It's me, Roman from Epic Times, and then a few of the folks from NTD, Tiffany Meyer, I'm sure you've seen her, Cindy Druk here, Chris Bob. We have a lot of fun doing that show. We have a lot of fun doing it. And it's a more casual, we joke around. It's a lot less serious. We joke around a lot more, but I think we still get some pretty solid news coverage in. If you want to watch Prime Time, that is on Fridays. That's at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. So you can watch that on Epic TV or NTD. All right, folks, that said, thank you so much for being here. On that point, again, let me know if there's anything you would like me to investigate, any topics you would like to see more in-depth coverage on. Is there anything that you've been hearing in the news and you want to know if it's true or not, and you would like me to look into it and do so in a more in-depth way? Let me know, because I'm going to start doing that. So let me know in the chat, and I will, again, see you all on Monday. Join me for Prime Time tomorrow. That's going to be 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Have a great weekend otherwise. And that said, folks, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, stay free. Thank you.